we are now going to get started. Welcome to our January 20th Bayou Culture Collaborative gathering. And we have got a wonderful program scheduled for you guys today. And so with that, let's get us started here. So today we have with us Stuart Brown, who's going to be talking to us about Louisiana's Coastal Master Plan. So Stu's has been described as the head chef of the master plan, or the architect putting it all together. So we're very happy to hear from him in just a minute. We'd also like to introduce our BCC management team. I am lucky enough to have a seat on that team, as well as Maida Owens, Dr. Carolyn Ware, and Dr. Gary LaFleur. So we've also got a few new things for a new year, along with the black eyed peas and all the cabbage. So the South Louisiana Wetlands Discovery Center, of which I'm the executive director, is taking on a new role with the Bayou Culture Gatherings. And so Sarah Fontana, who is with us today, is leading us for logistics and tech support, making sure our lives go well with the Zoom meetings, as well as Angel Perkle, who's going to be helping us with communications. Theo Hilt is with us for the Bayou Culture Collaborative response to the master plan, and Simone Romain will be talking to us about the position statement, and then also helping us with the fundraising aspect. So thank you to all of you for being with us this year. We've said this before, if you've been a part of our gatherings in the past, we don't necessarily advocate for any particular adaptation strategy or say that this is the thing that we have to do. This is just a place where we can share ideas and begin very difficult conversations sometimes about how we move forward successfully and maintain our cultural identities. The partners for our group, we've got Louisiana Folklore Society, Center for Bayou Studies, Folk Life Louisiana, Center for Louisiana Studies, and of course, the Wetlands Discovery Center. And couldn't do this without the money. So a great thank you to the National Endowment for the Arts and Louisiana Office of Cultural Development. So I'd like to invite Ms. Maida Owens to talk a little bit about the Passing It On workshops, which have been an extremely successful part of the work that we do. Maida?
Yeah, I just want to remind everybody that we continue to have funds for Passing It On workshops, and this is for a tradition bearer to pass on a tradition within their own community, ideally. But both in tradition bearers or organizations can apply for the funds. And this month, we want to spotlight Greyhawk Perkins, who is a member of the United Home and Nation. He has many, many traditions that he could pass on. He's a musician, very skilled in many traditions. But last year, he passed on storytelling. He has an art of storytelling workshop that he does. And he also did his shaving horse workshop. And if you don't know what a shaving horse is, the man in the second photograph is using one, and it is a piece of equipment that holds a piece of wood while you shave it. So it is a shaving horse because you kind of ride it like a horse and shave the wood. So this is part of the primitive woodworking skills that he's passing on. Thanks to Greyhawk, he is sharing his knowledge with both members of his tribe and beyond.
Thank you very much for that, Maida. I appreciate that. So today, this is sort of our agenda. We're gonna have the presentation, Stuart, and then we'll be able to ask some questions and have a discussion with him. We'll always do the Hope for the Coast. We want to hear from Stu about that, as well as the people in this group. We're going to have an update and some more information about the position statement, information about our working groups, any announcements that the groups, that anyone has. And then, of course, at about 1 o'clock, we'll transition things into an informal discussion to about 1:30. So with no further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce you all to Stuart Brown, who is the head honcho, sort of manages everybody to make the Coastal Master Plan come to life. And so, Stu, thanks so much for taking the time today to be with us. And the floor is yours.
All right. Let me get my slides up. All right. Yep. Excuse me. So I'm Stu. Thank you guys for having me. I'm looking forward to the discussion. As many of you know, the draft master plan came out a couple weeks ago, 2 weeks ago today. And so I'm going to provide kind of a general overview to the plan, and then hopefully we'll have a bunch of time for discussion. So I gave this presentation to the CPRA board that oversees our agency, and one of the most enthusiastic pieces of feedback was that Dwayne Bourgeois, North Lafourche Levee District, hates this picture of the Carolina skiff that we've been using as our transition slide for like 5 years now. So I went through and I've been adding new pictures this morning. So that's my oldest daughter. Let's see. All right. So most of y'all on the call know this, but you know, somebody may come across this presentation sometime later. I think it's important to provide a little bit of context, but Louisiana has been facing a land loss crisis for nearly a century. We've lost almost 2,000 square miles of coastal wetlands since 1932. There are many causes for this land loss. Some of these are natural processes you would expect to see in a system like ours. But much of this loss is the result of, or at least exacerbated by, human activity. And the land loss is, of course, significant from a landscape and habitat perspective. It directly impacts the fisheries and wildlife resources. And it, of course, impacts the jobs and the folks who rely on those resources for subsistence. It also affects industries like agriculture and navigation and oil and gas activities in the coastal zone. And again, as a result, impacts the folks who make their livings off of those or associated industries. And of course, land loss also increases the flooding impact of hurricanes and tropical storms that affect nearly all coastal communities. This is how most folks, I think, most acutely experience the coastal change in Louisiana. And so the master plan is the kind of guiding document of how we try to meet those challenges. And so what is at stake is our homes, our jobs, and our culture. The kind of broad goal of the master plan, or the broad goal of our state project of having a resilient coast is to have a coast where people can continue to live and work and build communities and take advantage of all the things that make Louisiana so economically, environmentally, and culturally special. So to take a quick step back, provide some context for why CPRA is doing this or why we even have an agency. CPRA was established following the hurricanes of 2005. There was a realization that our restoration folks were in one agency, our risk reduction folks were in another agency, and our priorities were being set all over the place by different federal agencies, by different local entities, and by a whole host of different state agencies. And there wasn't a single entity that could clearly articulate the state's goals in terms of coastal protection and restoration. And so CPRA was established to be that entity and given the mandate to develop, implement, and enforce a comprehensive restoration and risk reduction master plan. So what is the master plan? At its core, it is a prioritization effort. How can the state spend its money most cost effectively over the next 50 years to reduce storm surge-based flood risk and build and maintain coastal wetlands? This is a high-level, long-term planning effort. Importantly, it is not a program, it is not a funding source. It identifies where the state should invest as money becomes available through a very wide range of potential funding sources. As money becomes available, these project concepts move into feasibility studies, engineering design, and ultimately, should they continue to prove viable and effective, are moved into construction. We operate, maintain, and monitor these projects, and what we learn from those projects feeds back into how we evaluate these projects through a planning process, and also how we design these projects. The plan is developed through a process that ensures adaptive management. We're required by law to update this plan every 6 years. That allows us to reassess the tools that we're using, incorporate the best available science, and reevaluate the process we're using to kind of arrive at this plan. It is built on world-class science and engineering. It advances a comprehensive and integrated approach to restoration and risk reduction. It incorporates extensive public input and review. And this last bullet point is one that we're really trying to stress with this master plan, or emphasize, is that it illustrates how the coast is going to change, in ways that hopefully can allow for preparation and adaptation into the future. So we know that the coast is going to look very different 20, 30, 50 years from now, whether we're 100% successful at implementing the projects that we identify or not. We also know that the project of having a resilient coast is much bigger than the restoration and risk reduction projects that CPRA builds. And so we do think that's an important part of it, but to truly have a resilient coast, that's going to be the result of countless decisions by individuals, communities, local government, businesses, all levels of government. And we want to make sure that the information about how the coast is going to change along many different axes are available and accessible for those individuals and entities to use when they are making decisions about their future in coastal Louisiana. And so that's a big ask. We want people to understand and use our information. One of the first steps, I think, in that is the state trying to get their own house in order, and make sure that our fellow agencies are using this information as well in their long-term planning. And so Governor Edwards started the Adaptive Governance Initiative. Many all know Charles Sutcliffe. He's been leading that up. But this is really an effort to get other agencies with other expertise to understand how coastal change, understand how that coastal change may affect either their assets or the programs that they administer, and use that in their planning efforts. So again, the broader question of resilience is not something that's answered solely by the projects and work that CPRA implements. It's going to require a much broader effort, and so again, one of the goals is to be able to share, disseminate information that can help folks with kind of understanding and forming their decisions. So kind of the upcoming schedule here, the draft was released on the 6th. There's a public comment period through March 25th. There'll be 4 public meetings spanning January 31st through the February 16th. I got a slide with the locations and dates towards the end of the presentation. And then based on that feedback, there will be a revised plan presented to the board in the CPRA board on April 19th, and then we will submit that final draft to the legislature for approval after the board approves it. And well, quickly here, I'll say I understand that some folks are working on kind of a combined response or public comment. We really do encourage any of y'all to provide comments, whether it is kind of the consensus of the group that you work with or kind of individual thoughts that you may have. a lot. I'm going to talk about improvements that we've made since 2017. A lot of this is based on feedback that we've gotten during the 2017 process and shortly thereafter. There are certainly changes that can go into the final 2023 plan in a few months, but some of the kind of broader changes about how the process works, are things that we want to include as we begin again on creating a master plan for 2029. So we'll provide a little more information on how to do that a little bit later. So I have a lot of kind of technical slides, and I'll try to hit these at a very high level so we can move to the discussion, which I think will be the more important part of this presentation. But just a quick overview of how we end up selecting the projects that end up in the Coastal Master Plan. Don't worry about all these squiggles and small lines. This is in the plan. If you're interested, I think it's a helpful distillation of the process, but you can check it out on your own time. The key are those labels at the top: projects, modeling, and prioritization. And so we begin with a suite of candidate projects, and these projects come from a wide range of sources. We mine past plans. We have public solicitations. Anybody can submit a project. You don't have to have an engineering degree to do this. It can be a drawing on a paper. We have engineers. We can figure out what it'll cost to do that, what it'll take to build something. And we also, for this master plan, set up regional work groups to work with folks who have some experience in this, and as well as some kind of local knowledge to help develop new project concepts, and also evaluate or reevaluate, rethink about some of the projects that have been proposed for years and have not moved forward, and perhaps there's ways to rethink about those projects that may make them more effective. So we start with a suite of candidate projects. We then model those projects. So we are modeling the coastal system to understand how land will change, how habitats will change, how vegetation and wetland morphology will change. We're modeling to understand what sort of storm surge will be propagated by tropical storms now and into the future. And then we're trying to understand what sort of damage that storm surge will cause, and that's the risk component. And so we're modeling these projects to understand how they will perform over the next 50 years compared to a future without action. And we model them under a range of potential future environmental scenarios. And then the final step is prioritization. And so the modeling tells us how these projects will perform across a number of metrics. And then the prioritization is where we try to understand what is the suite of projects that is the best investment given constraints of funding and sediment availability. That understanding, we'd love to build every project and every concept that gets sent our way, but this at a certain point needs to be a resource limited plan, and so that the state can kind of focus its efforts. We also develop metrics. Some of these are environmental metrics, which are largely habitat suitability indices to try to understand what sort of habitats and species will be supported by future landscapes, both with and without the projects that we're implementing. We also have community metrics where we're combining model outputs with characteristics of the community, whether it's major industries or demographic characteristics, to try to understand, again, how the changing coast will impact different communities, and how and also how the projects that we select affect those different communities. And those can be used as a check during the prioritization process to make sure that we're not selecting suites of projects that disproportionately impact certain communities or certain resources. This is another new picture I threw in for what's in the plan. Again, our complex graphic, just to point out that the starting point for this master plan is past master plan. So we're building off of the tools and processes that we've developed in the past. And as I mentioned at the top, a lot of what we learned through the 2017 process, through the public comment period, through the community conversations that we've had, through just discussions we've had around the plan, like the one I suspect we'll have shortly, feed into the improvements that we make for the next master plan. I'll hopefully cruise through these pretty quickly. We're always improving the data that goes into our tools for analyzing how the coast will change. We're of course working in a really dynamic system, and so we need to have the most up-to-date data. We also have been able to take advantage of pretty significant technical improvements in the availability of landscape data. Our storm surge modeling, we have a much more robust suite of synthetic storms that we can model. In short, this just gives us a better ability to understand current exposure to potential flood depths, as well as future exposure. And then another, mostly because it's cool, but it is a huge improvement in our process, is we have much better understanding of the assets that are impacted by that flooding. So that's part of the process. We understand the likelihood of different flood depths. We need to understand the damage that is associated with those flood depths. And we've been working with a guy at Purdue who's used Google Street View imagery and a machine learning algorithm to estimate first floor elevations. And that's been, previously we had to make pretty broad assumptions about first floor elevations. That of course makes a huge difference when there's, we're projecting 3 feet of flooding. It makes a huge difference whether that's a slab on grade house or one that's on 6-foot piers. So large improvements in the input data. There have been significant model improvements. I am distilling literally tens of thousands of man hours into one slide here. I will encourage you, if you're interested, we have quite a few resources, technical documents, as well as a lot of recorded presentations about different improvements to the modeling. This kind of started during COVID when we weren't able to have as many outreach events. We started just recording a lot of presentations as we went, because we didn't have kind of the need to document things, because we had certain public events to present them at. So we just started assigning ourselves deadlines and putting some of those presentations up on the internet. And another improvement is in the last 6 years, there have been somewhat significant advancements in our understanding of environmental drivers. And this includes climate-related drivers like sea level rise and temperature, but also things like subsidence that are not, of course, tied to climate change. And so this is written up in the plan, but we use 2 scenarios in our analysis. We call them our lower and higher scenario. And so we have just a better ability to kind of understand how those fit in the context of climate science. And we have a better ability to make sure, as we're looking at these scenarios, we're co-varying all the climate-related variables the way that you would expect to see them if you were to realize a more severe climate future or a more moderate climate future. So in addition to that kind of group of improvements, which we'll categorize as kind of incorporating the best available science, there are also a fair amount of improvements in the process. And again, based on a lot of the feedback we received around the 2017 plan, one of the significant pieces of feedback was we need to take more of a regional approach with this. The problems of the Cheniere Plain and the solutions for the Cheniere Plain are not those of Terrebonne or not those of the North Shore. And so one of the steps in this process was to develop regional work groups, taking advantage of a lot of folks who have participated in the past, but also trying to find engaging new folks to participate in these groups. And I mentioned earlier, we worked with them on developing new project concepts and refining project concepts that had been around for a while. But they also served as a venue for us to kind of meet with fairly regularly throughout the process and talk about kind of region-specific issues. And if you open up the plan, there's about a quarter of the plan or third of the plan maybe is dedicated to this regional write-ups. And within there, there's a lot of kind of storylines about what is important to what is specifically important in those regions. And also we designed a lot of kind of one-off analysis to help illustrate that and what that may look like in the future for those regions. And that was informed by those work groups. Another improvement is we developed a new risk metric for our analysis and for how we select structural risk reduction projects. And so this is the new metric is called expected annual structure damage. There's a technical write-up in the plan and the appendices that I won't go into, but really this is a response to kind of, I guess, feedback with the 2017 plan, but also more broad feedback in the kind of world of risk reduction, that kind of dollar-based metrics for prioritizing projects like a BCA that the Army Corps does, or the metric we use, expected annual damage in dollars, the metric we had used in 2017, may implicitly prioritize projects that protect areas with more valuable assets. In other words, more affluent, wealthier communities. And so we developed this metric as an alternative and also as a check on that assumption, or that implication that solely using a dollar-based value for prioritizing risk reduction might lead to different results. And so we use both metrics in our project selection. They are both important in understanding risk, but they tell us different things about the type of risk that those communities experience, and different things about, again, the risk that would be mitigated by these projects. Another improvement from 2017 is that we're prioritizing across a range of potential future environmental scenarios. I mentioned earlier, there's more information available on potential environmental scenarios, but what we're doing with this plan that's different is, rather than planning for a single scenario and then maybe hoping for a better outcome, we're trying to select projects that will perform well, that will be effective, whether we realize a more severe future condition or a more moderate future condition. And so again, the projects have to be effective under both scenarios. And then lastly, for this section, I mentioned this a bit earlier with the regional approaches, but we did a bunch of kind of one-off analyses. We say one-off because they're not part of the project selection process, but really to help illustrate hopefully how people will experience coastal change and climate change into the future. And so one of these is a high tide flooding analysis. There are a lot of kind of fairly broad high tide flooding viewers or something that are on the internet. NOAA has one. They are not particularly valuable for Louisiana. Louisiana is unique for a number of reasons, but those are usually based on a tidal gauge. They use Grand Isle. Grand Isle is not representative of much, further than 20 miles from Grand Isle. So we did a few kind of bespoke analyses on different communities. We did 8 different communities. I think we wrote up 2 or 3 of them in the plan itself. The rest will be available in the appendices. And there will, and one, we're looking at kind of key locations within the community, whether it's a community center or whether it's a lot of times we use kind of low points in roads, because they're going to be the most exposed exposed in most cases, and it affects your ability to get around your community. And look at how frequently those might be exposed to high tide flooding now versus 25 years from now versus 50 years from now. We also, for some of these communities, did a drive time analysis. Some communities, it's just a yes or no. You can drive or you can't. But some communities, we could do an analysis of, all right, well, if these roads are underwater, what does it take to get to a hospital or a fire station or some other community center if these areas are going to be flooded more frequently. There are other examples of this exploratory analysis, and they're written up in the plan a little bit, really to try to help in many ways and help people kind of I don't know, more concretely understand what we say, when instead of me saying, you know, the risk associated with this metric is going to increase by this percentage, we can give more concrete examples of how they may experience that change in the future. All right, so the plan itself, ultimately we selected 61 restoration projects, 12 structural risk reduction projects, and identified $11 billion for non-structural risk reduction. Just a couple highlights on the restoration side. We identified $2.7 billion in new diversions. I have the asterisk on new because in our analysis, we included the Mid-Barataria sediment diversion, the Mid-Breton sediment diversion, and the river reintroduction into Maurepas Swamp in the base scenario in our Future Without Action. And so that is because we expect these projects to be built, and because we want future investments to work synergistically with these projects, and perhaps more importantly, not have negative interactions with these projects. And so those are significant restoration projects. Those are not accounted for when we're talking about the land area benefited by the project identified in this master plan. Those are baked into the baseline conditions. And separately, we did an analysis of the difference of including those or not including those, because we do want to show people that there are expected to be effective projects, but in this plan, those are not listed as projects in the plan because they're assumed to be already moving forward and to be constructed in the near future. Over $19 billion of the projects, restoration projects, end up being dredging projects. So marsh creation and land bridge projects. This remains a huge part of our restoration, I guess, toolkit. It is something that's you know, not dependent on having a river nearby. It's available in areas that things like hydrologic restoration may not be. So it remains a huge part of the planned restoration program into the future. And then another point here is that we have identified $2.5 billion for programmatic projects, programmatic restoration projects. And we've done this in the past. If you're familiar with the 2017 plan, things like barrier islands, small-scale hydrologic restoration, and oyster reefs were considered programmatically consistent with the master plan. That is for a number of reasons. They're best administered on a kind of project-by-project basis, or evaluated on a project-by-project basis at a scale that maybe doesn't match with what we do in the master plan. With barrier islands, it's because the need is tied very specifically to where the most recent storm came through. And if we were to identify projects as being in or out of the master plan, and then the storm came in the wrong place, then our plan is immediately outdated. Things like hydrologic restoration and oyster reefs, again, these are things that are best evaluated and implemented through programs that we have, like the Restoration Partnership Fund, QIPRA, the Parish Matching Program that has the ability to evaluate these projects on a case-by-case basis. With the plan, under the lower scenario, 314 square miles of land is built that would otherwise have been or built or maintained that otherwise would have been lost at year 50. And under the higher scenario, it's 233 square miles. So we see a greater benefit around year 40. And that decline between year 40 and 50 is actually a lot of the projects that are in our process selected early, these large scale marsh creation projects. They are really effective for 30, 35, 40 years, but they are, I guess, overwhelmed by continued subsidence and increasing rates of sea level rise under that higher scenario. And so that's why we see that drop off. And so we'll move through these pretty quickly, but this is year 10 under the lower scenario, 20, 30, 40, and 50. And then moving to the higher scenario, year 10, 20, 30, 40, and 50. And we see a lot of those marsh creation projects that are on the landscape through year 40 are unable to keep pace with relative sea level rise. So on the risk reduction side, we select 12 structural risk reduction projects for a total of $14 billion. And we identify $11.2 billion for non-structural mitigation. And so well, I'll stop through this. Let me see. Okay, had to check what slides I included or didn't include. Sorry about that. So we'll talk about non-structural here. So within the plan this time, we don't identify communities as being selected for non-structural or not selected for non-structural. And the reason for this is really that the scale of our analysis doesn't match with the scale at which these projects are implemented. And so we're looking at these on a community level. Communities range from, a few dozen people to, in some cases, it's, Slidell or something that's like 50,000 people. But the projects, non-structural projects, are frequently implemented on, or mostly implemented on a structure by structure basis. I should stop real quickly and say by non-structural, we mean elevating homes, flood-proofing businesses, and voluntary acquisition of structures that are exposed to really high levels of flooding. And so these are normally administered or implemented on a structure by structure basis. And so within our analysis, a community may be selected and a community may not be selected. The one that's not selected within that community may have some very good investments for non-structural mitigation. And by it not being in the master plan, it may be precluded from access to certain funding sources. And so we use non-structural a little bit differently in this master plan. It is, again, what we talked about as being kind of programmatically consistent with the master plan. And so while we're not identifying specific projects as being in or out of the master plan, what we do have at a community level, and there are about 300 and some communities across the coast, is estimates of the costs of those projects, the type of interventions that those projects might be composed of in terms of the amount of structures elevated, the amount of structures flood-proofed, amount of structures that could be acquired. We know the amount of risk that could be mitigated through those efforts. And so this information is hopefully a starting point for communities that are either interested in exploring risk reduction options or are interested in soliciting funding from a wide range of funding sources. CPRA has a relatively small non-structural program budget compared to programs that are administered by Governor's Office of Homeland Security and Emergency Preparedness and Office of Community Development. But this information can hopefully help those communities one, understand their risk, understand their options for mitigating that risk, and then try to solicit funding for those projects. So this is the without action projected flood depths at year 50 under our lower scenario. These are the 1% flood depths. And you see the kind of abrupt signature on either side of some of the structural protection projects. And this is the difference of with and without action. So of course, we see this pretty significant reduction in flood depths behind levee projects. That makes sense. That's the point of levees. We also see places like the Southwest. We're seeing a reduction in flood depths, and that in the Southwest is attributable just to the restoration projects that are selected. So we know that the restoration projects do have an impact on flood depths. It is almost never going to be as significant as a structural protection project. But it is important that we are seeing those benefits. And this is what it looks like in terms of risk reduction. And so again, in this example, we're using the expected annual damage in dollars. And we are seeing significant risk reduction behind the structural projects. We're also seeing risk reduction again in the Southwest. That's again attributable to the restoration projects. And so risk reduced at year 50 compared to a future without action. We, under our lower scenario, with this level of investment, the $25 billion allocated for risk reduction, we could reduce risk by 70%, or $10.8 billion in expected annual damages. So that is the annual value at year 50. And then under the higher scenario, it's a 60% reduction and a reduction of $14.6 billion in annual damages at year 50. And if we measure that in EASD, we see a very similar trend coastwide. We actually see a greater proportional risk reduction, 78% under the lower scenario and 65% under the higher scenario. And so one of the takeaways is that this level of investment could mean that coastwide in 50 years under the lower environmental scenario, Louisiana has less risk from hurricanes and tropical storms than we do today. So going forward, we mentioned the public comment period is open through March 25th. There are public meetings in Baton Rouge, Houma, New Orleans, and Lake Charles, with the dates on the screen. I believe we can throw that in the chat as well. If you would like to make a public comment, those can be submitted via email or in writing to the address on the screen. You can also make public comments at the public meetings. If there's kind of a position paper, we ask you also send that to us in addition to us transcribing it from a meeting. And then again, the final plan will be updated following that public comment period and delivered to the board on April 19th, and then submitted to the legislature shortly after that April 24th date. I'm not actually sure about. So one thing that I would ask you all to do is, and many of you probably already have, is please take some time to look at the plan itself, to pat my team on the back a little bit. I think this is a really, by the standards of these sort of technical documents, I think it's a really accessible document to read. We also have a data viewer available online. You can explore that. For those who really want to get into the details, we have appendices and supporting materials available on our website as well. Some of those we're still finalizing and will be publishing over the next month or so. And I mentioned earlier, we also have a ton of recorded presentations available as well. So with that, thank you. And I think Jonathan's going to take back over for leading the discussion with my headshot. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Steve. We appreciate it greatly. Well, being mindful of time, we will just have a little bit of time to ask a few questions to Stu. One thing that I wanted to ask you, in seeing it, it seems as though the technology has greatly improved and the modeling has improved to where we can get a better picture of what we're going to be up against, right? I remember when the plans first came out, when they were updated, that our worst case scenario became the best case scenario in the beginning of this. You know, it was sort of like, this is what we're looking at. And then the next time it was updated, we looked at it and was like, okay, well, we thought it was going to be that bad, but it's really probably is going to be a little bit worse. How do you feel right now with the current modeling? When it's a best case scenario, worst case, do you think in 5 years, when you go to update this again, our worst case becomes the best case and it just keeps doing that every 5 years? Or how do you feel about that?
No, I don't think that's kind of one. I don't think that's the case. I think I think from 2012 to 2017, they did that kind of worst case to best case scenario. From 2017 to where we are now, the primary drivers of land loss in our modeling are subsidence and sea level rise. And subsidence is consistent over the next 50 years. Sea level rise is accelerating. The projections of sea level rise in the most recent IPCC report, and the IPCC is not the be-all end-all of sea level rise projections, but they're lower than their previous report. Additionally, there's a lot of uncertainty around this. The range of uncertainty has been reduced with advances in the kind of broader climate science. So I guess I don't think extrapolating to, well, you know, these are the two scenarios. Are we going to just be shifting our scenarios worse and worse? At a certain point, if we are 5 years from now and we realize that what we have identified as our higher scenario is the more likely outcome, then we need to fully reevaluate the way we're approaching restoration, or even how we allocate money to if we allocate money to restoration. But I think the good news is that the current state of the science suggests that level of sea level rise is unlikely over the next 50 years, certainly, and perhaps not for some time beyond that.
And I think one of the things for this group the takeaways, I think that's important for us in the work that we're doing and moving forward, is that idea of what happens in 40 years at the worst case scenario, should that be what we experience, and that between years 40 and 50, that drop is going to be really very difficult for a lot of communities. And so knowing that could be an option, that's probably something for us to think about now to prepare for should that happen, because that looks really chaotic, and having a plan for that would be great. Mr. Moore, you have a question?
Yeah, thanks. And Stu, thanks so much for this presentation. I have only had a chance to skim through the plan, and this has been really helpful in getting a sense of what's in it and what's new and what y'all are up to. I have a question about some of the non-structural projects that you talked about. You said the scale of those non-structural projects is smaller than the CPRA's sort of scale of analysis. But I think for a lot of people in this group, those are the scales that people are working with and living in and are from. So I'm wondering if you know, just skimming through the plan, it looks like there's this insistence that non-structural projects are really important. I'm wondering, like, if CPRA is, as you say, the sort of central agency in charge of restoration stuff, do you anticipate the agency taking on more of a role, partnering with communities to develop plans and help them secure funding for non-structural? And then sort of building off of that, this 11 billion seems, I think it's a bigger number than the last plan for non-structural projects. I'm wondering how much of that exists at this point. If there are like, if it's the CPR that's responsible for finding that 11 billion or for figuring out how to make that appear, and then also who administers that. But again, thank you so much. This has been extremely helpful.
Yeah, and so there were a couple questions in there. The first about the scale, that's about the scale of that's about what led us to not define, DULAC is in and DULARGE is out. Or I made those up, but theoretically, that's if we had submitted those projects or kind of within our analysis constructs, we would have come out with a checkerboard of projects that are in or out. And it may be that within one of those communities, they're really good investments. Within another, they're not so good investments. And we're not looking at this at a house by house basis. We've been told not to. So we look at it at a community level. And so within that, we do have a lot of information at a community level. And we actually, maybe over the next year or so, are going to look into how we can maybe dive into greater detail on a handful of communities. About what those sort of or what a range of different interventions would do in terms of the risk that could be mitigated by what sort of non-structural investment. And to the question of does CPRA want to be involved with the communities and helping kind of think about what these options are, the answer is absolutely. When it comes to actually implementing these projects, this is an area where I guess the Watershed Initiative is kind of the model for this, which is we have a non-structural program at CPRA that has, in the tens of millions of dollars available, like low like $10 million available to it. We have a non-structural program administered by, it's not a broad, we have the HUD funding administered by OCD, which is on the hundreds of millions of dollars. We have programs that are disaster response administered by GOSEP that could be on the hundreds of millions of dollars. And the answer of where the funding comes from, it needs to be like all hands on deck. And one of the goals of the Watershed Initiative is to have all of those agencies coordinating. And when there's a need in community X, going to the Watershed Initiative and saying, where does this fit? And OCD says, actually that fits under this HUD grant from, Hurricane Isaac 12 years ago or something. We can find funding for that way. And there have been some examples of successes with that model, but certainly to try to find the 11 billion or so dollars is going to require a lot more. And then to the overall funding question, maybe I partially answered that. This is an all hands on deck, and for the whole budget of the plan, we used a $50 billion planning budget. We can make estimates about what amount of funding will be available over the next 3 years, 10 years, programs we expect to continue for 10, 15 years. But beyond that, it really is it's a statement of priorities. This is what we can accomplish for this amount of money. We need our delegations in Washington. We need our local governments, our state governments, finding that money to actually implement these projects.
Thank you so much for the question and the answer. And keep being mindful of time. We're going to move forward. I hope, Stu, that you'll be able to stay for the informal part of the conversation so that if anybody else has other questions, we can have that discussion. One of the things that we like to do is ask our guests what their hope for the coast is, being mindful that without hope, there's no reason for action. And so it's very important that we remain hopeful in looking toward the challenges that we face. So with that, Stu, what's your hope for the coast?
Well, I was thinking about it in terms of like why I'm maybe hopeful or optimistic, and I think it's something we touched on your question, which is that I think that there are significant opportunities in terms of the restoration that we can do, in terms of the risk reduction measure, like that note at the end of the slide is like we can have, if we can get the want to and the money, we have the ability to create a coast 50 years from now that has less total risk, and that's total. Certain areas are still going to be quite exposed. Certain areas could see far less risk, but the I guess I'm answering in the context of questions I get from reporters that are like, well, why don't we just move everybody out of Louisiana? Like, why are we even doing this? And I think there are very real ways that we, the thing I said at the start, can continue to have a coast where people can live and take advantage of all the things that make coastal Louisiana important. And I guess I maybe should have mentioned this at some point, but like we want there to be coastal communities, and I think maybe sometimes that's lost. Like we talked about those different funding sources. Certain funding sources only do buyouts. They don't elevate homes. They want to, in their ledger of risk, it is more effective for them to buy communities out. These are administered by folks up in DC, and on their ledger, that looks better to move people out of the coast. And the example I give is, well, if you're in Denham Springs and they want to buy out your community, you can move across town and still go to the same church and bar and whatever. With our coastal communities, that's not the case. And people live in these places for a number of reasons, but they live there for specific reasons. And we want to certainly not put people at unnecessary danger or unnecessary risk, but we want to try to continue to have these communities where and we think that there, I guess the hopeful part is we think there are opportunities to do that and push back against that narrative that we need to abandon South Louisiana.
I appreciate that. Thank you. And I agree. If any of you in the meeting now would also like to post what your hope for the coast is in the chat, we'd certainly appreciate that. So I'd like to ask Theo if you could talk a little bit about the work that your group is doing. Again, we're a little bit over time right now, so for the rest of you that are going to be presenting, just please be mindful of that.
Theo had to drop out, he had to run, but basically we are responding to the Coastal Master Plan, and Theo is leading it. And this is an open process. He's doing this through the Culture and Coastal Planning Working Group. If that is something you'd like to participate in, you're more than welcome. And I've dropped into the chat how to contact Theo. But please participate if that is something you'd like to do.
Thank you for that, Raina. And then also we've got our BCC position statement. And so Simone, or if you're with us, we'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, thanks so much. So the folks at BCC have drafted and approved a position statement that talks about our principles for integrating the environmental dimension into coastal and environmental planning. This is important because we're still trying to get folks to sign on. You can either sign on as an individual, or if you are authorized to, you can sign on for your organization. If you were involved in writing the position statement, thank you, and you may have voted to approve it, but just because you voted to approve it does not mean that you actually signed on to it. So the best thing to do if you're not sure is just go to the website and look at the BCC page, look to see if you're signed on. If you're not, go ahead and sign on. Also, I'm trying to, promote this and think of a strategy for getting a lot of our key stakeholders signed on. So if you have any ideas, you can email me. Maida's going to put my email into the chat, and also just be on the lookout because we're going to be sending some email reminders about this. So just be checking your inbox, and yeah, that's it.
Thank you.
And saying thanks to everyone that has signed on so far. We have gotten a good chunk of folks, 49 people and 15 orgs. So thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that update, Simone. And so here is a little bit more information about the other working groups. The French language group meets on Tuesday, February 14th at 2. This group meets monthly. And then the culture and coastal planning working group meets Thursday, January 26th at 1, and that group meets twice a month. Again, we'll have the emails right here for those of you who would like to contact these folks to be a part of those working groups. All right, our next Bayou Culture Gathering our guest will be Taylor Marshall from Restore the Earth. We'll be talking about the value of cultural and heritage assets. We hope that all of you will be able to join us again. That's going to be Friday, February 24th at 12 noon. Please keep an eye out for the invite that will be coming through those emails. In light of the time, if anyone has any announcements that they'd like to make, I'd ask that you keep them brief so that we can move into the informal part of the meeting. Anybody, you can raise your hand. It'll kick you up to the top of the list if there's anything that you need to announce. And if not, here are the ways that you can stay in touch with us through the Bayou Culture Gatherings. Also, if you missed it, you can check out the highlights of 2022, and also Zero Skidmore's poem, The Flow of Culture, that is on our YouTube channel. So if you haven't seen it, please check that out. It's really some good stuff. So thank you again so very much. Thank you, Stu, for being with us. It was really helpful to hear directly from you about the master plan. Thanks so much, and we hope to see you again next month.